Hello and welcome to the Buckeye Weekly pregame for Ohio State and Penn State. I'm Tom Orr, joined by Tony Gerdeman and Kevin Noon. I guess before we talk about the Ohio State Penn State game, we should probably talk about the game that just ended. Tony, first of all, that Michigan State game was a banger.
That was awesome. And that has to be the most painful loss for Michigan in some time, to be up 16 points, have a bunch of calls go against you, know that, you know what, we're okay. It's 16 points. Even if they score two touchdowns, it's not like they're going to get both 2-point conversions. And then they do. And then, wow, that's just, you can see the players walking off the field just looking devastated. So, this one hurts. And I've been saying Michigan State was the second best offense in the Big Ten. They didn't show it against Indiana. They showed it today. And they didn't even give Kenneth Walker the ball as much as they probably should have.
That whole game felt like watching the 2020 Big Ten championship game, where it's like you just want to run down to the sidelines and tap the coaches on the shoulders. Like, are you watching the same game that I am? Because you've got a running back who they don't seem to be able to tackle. Why are you throwing the ball? Why don't you just football is a complicated game, but sometimes just run the thing that keeps working every time you run it. Like, that seems like that's actually not a bad plan. Kevin, I feel like that whole game, I was pretty impressed with Michigan, but it just there's just stuff in their game that was just like, oh, this is not going to go well for them against Ohio State later in the year.
Yeah, I think that watching that game, I certainly could. I know I was texting with you guys, and I was like, Stroud might throw for 600, Trevion might run for 200. I mean, all of those things were coming out. I mean, obviously the Ohio State coaches have plenty to worry about right now with the Penn State game just a few hours away, but I can assure you that there are people back at the Woody who are in charge of certain video aspects that are already getting tapes nice and ready for everybody for when those games come up there, and they've seen the way to stymie both of these teams, and you need to be able to run the ball and throw the ball, and Ohio State can do both of those. So I'm not going to do anything to rain on Michigan State's parade at the moment. I'm not going to do anything to sit there and, pile on Michigan. But I think both those teams are going to be in trouble when they face Ohio State.
Tom, can I address NBA
Sure.
fan here? Any
Sure.
apologies for preseason Mel Tucker evaluations? Yes.
Yeah.
I apologize profusely
I do.
for, I think I had him 7th in the Big Ten East, perhaps, or maybe Mike Loxley 7th. But that needs to be reevaluated. Where is he now? Is he number 2? He's certainly above Jim Harbaugh. He's 2-0 against Jim Harbaugh. You're not putting James Franklin 2 right now. Are you, knowing everything you know about him? Tom Allen does not look as good as he did. Mm-hmm. And I realize it should be more.
Yeah.
But even in the East, I'm just talking the East.
Oh, just in the East, yeah.
Yeah, I realize it shouldn't just be a one season or a half a season or 2/3 of a season, but the turnaround that he has brought and the culture that he has brought, you got to give him some credit. So yes, humblest apologies, NBA fan, and to, of course, Mel Tucker.
Yeah, I mean, before the season, we went through and we ranked Ohio State's toughest games on the schedule, and I think we got to, we went from least tough to toughest, and we got to Michigan State real early in that show. It wasn't before Akron or anything, but it was pretty early in that show. I think I might reevaluate where I got Michigan State on that list at this point, but we hadn't seen Kenneth Walker at that point, so that changes some things. And what was interesting to me about that game was both teams were pretty one-dimensional in a lot of ways with the ball. I mean, the EPA, I use this, but EPA, expected points added per play. So basically, if you have the ball 1st and 10 on the 50-yard line, you have a certain number of points you can expect to get on that drive. If you have a positive play that increases your likelihood of scoring on that drive, or the expected number of points you'd score on that drive, you get a positive EPA for that play. If you get sacked, for example, or you get stuffed for a loss, or you turn the ball over, whatever, and that has a negative impact, then you get minus points. Michigan passing the ball plus 0.46. They basically added a half a point to the number of expected points every time they threw the ball. And a lot of that was some of those long passes and long touchdowns. Okay, that's a lot of it. Rushing the ball. Big Bad Michigan, who was the best rushing attack in the country for the first month of the season, negative 0.36. They basically lost more than a third of a point every time they handed the ball off. That's not good. And then the other side, Michigan State, negative 0.23. Michigan was worse running the ball than Michigan State was passing the ball. And Michigan State running the ball, 0.51 yards EPA per play rushing the ball, and so that's better. Michigan State was better running the ball than Michigan was passing the ball. Michigan State was better passing the ball than Michigan was running the ball. Michigan State wins the game. So yeah, that was a fascinating game. And I mean, they were what? They were it was a even turnover margin, and it ended up even after that late turnover by
McCarthy.
And McCarthy, who had you might say he had trouble with the snap. I wouldn't say that personally because it was on a handoff, but some might say that. Tucker and Wake's Clawson in a battle for National Coach of the Year, says Yakov. And I mean, that's probably right, because those are two teams that are very similar, both Kenneth Walker adjacent, but also both teams that don't have a ton of talent. They're not, Tucker is just building back from sort of a disastrous end of the Antonio era. So he hasn't quite built that program yet. Clawson, like, he's been there for quite a while, but I mean, like, Wake is Wake. It's like, that's like Northwestern. It's like, yeah, he's been there forever, but you're only going to get so far. He's kind of hit the ceiling for Wake. But yeah, those are two teams that have been both undefeated right now. And it feels like, Tony, if those are the kind of teams that feel to me like if they get into the playoff, that's going to go very, very poorly for them. But, you have to really, really, tip your hat to the season that they're both having.
Unless they get Cincinnati in the first round. I would give the Coach of the Year to Mel Tucker because he actually knew how to use Kenneth Walker, and Dave Clawson didn't. And I realized they have a different running style, but gosh, you can't make do with that guy, and you can't get the star out of him because he is awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was pretty impressive. Cincinnati. Did either of you guys watch the Cincinnati game? I had that on my second screen for much of the afternoon.
I flipped around a little bit. I saw Tulane mess around, get the safety, go up, and then it ended up being about a 9-point Cincinnati game for a while. Then I saw them score again. I said, I'm done here. I was flipping around to Pitt, Miami. I was flipping around to Baylor, Texas. I bailed on Iowa, Wisconsin very early.
Ooh, yeah, Iowa, Wisconsin was exactly what you thought it would be, just really gross, and somehow went under 36.5, which, like, I wasn't even surprised, which is probably the most damning indictment you could possibly have of those two teams. But yeah, don't worry, Ben. We'll get to the Ohio State game. We've got plenty of time. We were just letting some people tune in. Don't worry, we'll get there. Yeah, it is. There was a lot of interesting games today. Yeah, the Cincinnati game, I watched a good bit of the Cincinnati game, and it's just like, you can't do that, Cincinnati. Like, this is 2 weeks in a row you've played a 1-win team, and everyone wants to give them some grace for the Navy game because it's a triple option, service academy, yada, yada, yada. Like, okay, that's fine. Tulane is not a service academy. Like, you don't get to keep getting shown grace for having garbage games against 1-win teams back-to-back weeks when, your second best win at this point is Indiana, who is terrible and got thumped by Maryland today. I mean, like, that is not that's you're going to have a lot of angry Cincinnati fans, but it's like you're doing this to yourselves. So a couple interesting games going on right now. Oklahoma up 7-0 on Texas Tech, kind of late in the first, and Ohio State fans, I'm sure, keeping a close eye on the Oregon game. Oregon up early on a very, 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 very bad Colorado team, 14-0. So
Tom,
that one is
can I
probably
jump in?
Sure.
I'm just reading Stuart Mandel's tweets about Cincinnati, and this is like an hour ago. We're really nitpicking Cincinnati for only being up 24-12 on Tulane. They've only trailed for 1 minute. Oklahoma trailed Kansas for 3 quarters last week. And as somebody on my timeline astutely pointed out to him, like, if you're talking about being a national championship contender, you're talking about being a playoff contender, then yeah, everything you do is going to be nitpicked. And 24-12 at one point on Tulane is very nitpicky, or is very worthy of being nitpicky. And then soon after that, he replies that they won 31-12. They trailed for 1 minute early in the game. I don't consider that struggling. I wonder if he would consider that struggling if it was Ohio State.
Well, it was halftime. They were up 14-12. In the middle of the third quarter, they were up.
Did they win?
12.
Did they win?
Yeah. Yes, Luke Fickle, they did win. Yes, I mean, like, I had someone in my mentions on Twitter like, well, this is what they do, so you can't. It's like, well, yes, this is what they do. They look like crap against bad teams. Are you missing? Like, this is literally the point I am making. They look like crap against bad teams. You can't do that if you have to win with some style points. So Ron says the year. I guess this is the second half.
I'll punch back to part one.
Yeah, Cincinnati looked anemic today, but so did Ohio State when they won the national championship against Miami. Was Ohio State playing in the AAC that year? No. Next question. All right, that was a year that Ohio State beat a bowl-bound Texas Tech team, a Rose Bowl-bound Washington State team, a whole bunch of very, very good teams in the Big Ten that year. Like, yes, and this is also like Florida State in 2014. Yes, you can do that if you play in a major conference. When you're playing 1-6 teams every week and looking like this against 1-6 teams, like 1-6 non-power teams, that at that point becomes more of a problem. Touchdown Texas Tech, Oklahoma yet again struggling with a team that is just fired its coach this week. So that's probably good.
And Florida's driving against Georgia. It's 0-0, about a minute and change left in the first. Mm-hmm. That's what I have in front of me.
Well, yes, that's a good win for Georgia because it's an SEC team. So, all right, that's enough rest of college football talk. Let's talk a little bit of Ohio State.
Oh, we don't want to talk about how the officials were out against Michigan. I mean, because that's going to be the narrative that's going to come out on social that they couldn't get a call. I mean, let me finish stirring the pot a little bit. I mean, they did get hammered on a couple of calls in that game. I'm going to be the first one to admit it.
There were a couple calls that did go against Michigan. Absolutely. The one with the where Peyton Thorne's shin was probably down was like, that was not a wrong call, but I thought that was that was pretty close to being overturned. Like I thought that was close. I thought that was close enough that like they could have overturned it and it wouldn't have been scandalous. That was kind of the biggest one. But yeah, I mean,
Kenneth Walker probably fumbled before.
Yeah, absolutely he did. Yes, absolutely he did. But
there may have been defensive holding or PI on that crossing route late. Maybe, I don't know. I mean,
but as our buddy Jeff Sabota, Blue Jackets Insider, tweeted, with rub routes and pick routes being the norm, I can't get too upset about maybe some defenders getting away with a little bit, but I was surprised, although I guess I shouldn't have been, considering all of a lot of calls that went Michigan State's way, and not surprisingly in East Lansing.
Yeah, it was you're not going to get every call on the road. That's just not how it works. So all right, so let's talk a little Ohio State, Penn State. I mean, I guess the first question on the Penn State side of the ball is Sean Clifford. Are you expecting Sean Clifford to play tonight? Tony, what is your expectation?
I do expect him to play, and how long he plays, I guess that's up to the Ohio State defense. Let's see what those ribs look like. Or, will they sauce those ribs, so to speak? I don't know, but they need him, because without him, they have no shot, no chance. So you've got to get as much out of him as he's willing to give. And, this is an Ohio guy who's been around for a long time. He's a tough kid, so he's probably going to give everything he has, which I don't know. I don't know how much that is. I don't know how much he has. And really the talent around him, the offensive line around him isn't, he's a game manager, but there's not a lot around him to manage. So you end up as that game manager, you kind of have to do everything. You have to tend the bar. You have to be back on the grill. You have to do all of these different things. And when you do that, service is kind of bad and it's slow, and, nothing is as great as it could be. So yeah, I think he plays as much as his body allows him to, but I won't be shocked if he gets knocked out of this game.
If you're watching the comments at the bottom of the screen, our Mick Walker just had I would say tweet of the day, but it was a YouTube comment of the day. I'm just going to say, if you know, and we're going to leave it at that. Kevin, I think the question, if Penn State doesn't have Sean Clifford, Taquan Roberson did not look great against Iowa, and maybe with a little more, maybe he's gotten some more reps. He's relatively young, so he has the opportunity to get better, obviously. But as you look back at that Penn State Iowa game, like, that one has not aged well at all. That one, that was the top 5 game of the year kind of candidate, and then since then both teams have just gone like straight into the side of the mountain. It is not good at all. If they have to bring in Taquan Roberson, presumably it makes them more one-dimensional. Does that to you look any different than it did when Indiana had to go to their backup quarterback last week?
Well, I think the problem is that Penn State's very much like Indiana in terms of just being a one-dimensional team. Neither of them can run the ball. So if you bring in Roberson, He does have that one dimension, but do they lose the dimension of being able to do anything with Jahan Dotson, who far and away is their most talented player? So you get a little bit more of a run-minded quarterback out there, and you lose everything else. And mobile quarterbacks certainly create issues. Ohio State is not invulnerable to that, but I think that a Penn State offense that already is kind of in the dumper gets flushed down into a new level if they lose Sean Clifford, and that's nothing against Roberson. It's just where they are, and I think you need to put some of that on coaching too. If you look back to last week, we're playing Sean Clifford because we're not preparing anybody else. They didn't prepare anybody else. So I think this week you do have to kind of prepare the other guys just for the chance that Clifford is unable to reach the conclusion. But it hurts their offense dramatically.
Well, and another challenge you're going to have with Roberson in it is if you're predictable and you're one-dimensional, that offensive line, that Penn State offensive line is not good. They are not good. And that is one of those things that, if you can keep other teams off balance, like maybe you can kind of play around and get away with that for a while. If you're predictable, that is not going to go well. Kevin mentioned Jahan Dotson, obviously the elite wide receiver for Penn State. Ohio State fans will remember him from just a couple insane catches last year against a lot of them going to be in Sean Wade, and it was a lot of like you're watching it, you're like, that's not really it on Sean Wade. Like that is a tip your cap kind of play. This year, is that Denzel Burke's going up against? Is it Cam Brown? Is it Seven Banks? Tony, to me, if Penn State's going to move the ball against Ohio State or hit some big plays against Ohio State, that's where they're probably going to have to do it.
Well, and the problem there is Jahan Dotson, I think, has 22 catches in the last 3 games for just over 200 yards. He's averaging under 10 yards a catch because they have to throw short because the accuracy beyond any distance is pretty shot. And so that limits what Jahan Dotson can do. He's good after the catch, but you can't just live on that because you'll eventually face teams that can tackle. And this is Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, their last 3 games, and he's 8 for 84, 8 for 48 against Iowa because they can tackle, and then against Illinois 6 for 69. So nice. It's not been outstanding, and this is a guy who's averaging 7 yards or 7 catches a game. So they go after him and they utilize him, but he only has 200-yard games, and one of those was to start the season at Wisconsin. The other is against Villanova. So you need to see more out of him, and that's a product of Sean Clifford's accuracy, the product of the offensive line probably not giving him enough time, or the Penn State offense enough time to dial stuff up downfield. But I am very interested to see what it looks like with either Denzel Burke or Cam Brown, Seven Banks, those 3 guys, and what happens when they move them around. What does that do? Marcus Williamson. Is that Lathan Ransom? Is that Cam Martinez? So there's going to be some matchups that they'll need to find. Just go back to what Michigan did with Mike Sainristel on the Michigan State linebacker. And you can move some guys around and get some matchups. And, Ohio State is hopefully they hope they have eliminated stuff like that of getting linebackers matched up on receivers with the bullet. But there's still some things that Penn State is going to have to do because if it's just talent against talent, Ohio State's going to win out. So you've got to try to outwit the talent and get the favorable matchups and then be able to protect long enough to attack those matchups and then also execute. So there's so much going against Penn State, not that they can't do it, but it's just every drive feels like it's uphill. And so that's going to be an issue all game long. Now they can go uphill, once or twice and, things look good, but it's like, can you do it all game long? And eventually, you start rolling back downhill the other way and giving up some yards. So it's going to be tough sledding. Jahan Dotson, if they only have one guy, you feel like you can take him away.
Yeah, an interesting question from Dale here. What is the status around recruiting of Travion Henderson's little brother? Saw some highlights. He looks pretty good too. If Mick Walker is still watching, you can hop in there and answer that one. You're probably better positioned to answer that one than we are. But Kevin, there was a good one earlier. I think it was from Sam, but suggesting that it may be more a thing where Penn State's able to move the ball through the screen game rather than through like a traditional passing game. Yeah, there it is. Sam Maloney. Penn State will have more yards throwing via screen passes and passing concepts. Possibly, but to me, that might rely somewhat on if Ohio State can get pressure with the front 4, they're not going to have to bring blitzes. Usually, when you're bringing blitzes, that's when you really get burned on screen passes. I don't know if Ohio State's going to need to blitz to get pressure on Clifford tonight, which is, maybe where that doesn't come true. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't disagree. I think that with the diminished offensive line of Penn State, and they're moving guys around and just trying to plug in cracks in the dam the best that they can, I think that Ohio State is not going to have to sell out to get to them, and because of that, I think that they're going to have the opportunity to defend some of that. I know that teams like to try and get to the outside with Ohio State just because they don't like what they see up the middle. I mean, just try and get some guys into space. So I mean, I could see them dinking and dunking and trying some of that, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be a recipe for success.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that they're going to be able to consistently move the ball no matter what. So that's for sure a question. Saw a question about the availability report that will come out in just a little bit. We'll have that a little later on in the show. That's not out yet, so that'll be coming out shortly. Other side of the ball, and this is kind of the fun side of the ball for Ohio State on offense. I think there are some real questions for Penn State on the defensive front. I mean, PJ Mustipher on the inside of that line out for the year. That's, I think, going to open up some real big holes. And you're watching the Michigan State game and how consistently Michigan was getting pressure on Peyton Thorne. It was like you kind of take for granted how good the Ohio State offensive line is, especially the tackles. Like you just haven't seen that. And you just haven't seen that with CJ Stroud all year. He's just had time. He's had, they talked about, not just wanting to keep him clean, but to give him like a real spacious pocket. They've been able to do that a lot this year without Mustipher, with Shaka Toney off to the NFL, Jason Oweh off to the NFL after last year. Like this is not quite the Penn State defensive line that it has been in the past. And Toney, to me, that sort of suggests Ohio State should be able to kind of get some holes, get some push up front, and not only protect CJ Stroud, but also move the ball on the ground as well.
Well, I keep going back to the fact that if Illinois could do what they did against Penn State, rushing for 350 some yards with no ability to really throw the ball, and Penn State knowing what's coming and not having any say in stopping it. Now what happens when you have an Ohio State offense that has one of the best running backs in the nation and one of the best passing games in the nation? It is the best offense in the nation. So how does Penn State gear up for that? Yes, every team wants to stop the run. Go ahead and try, and if you're successful, that's because you're committing so much to stop the run that now CJ Stroud is just throwing the ball on you. And Penn State has a really good defensive backfield. They're going to have to hold up because I don't know how long the defensive line will. I like Penn State's linebackers. They've got some athletes there. They've got some experience there. But if you're getting 3 or 4 yards before you even get to the linebackers, that eventually the cracks will just widen. It's like cracking your windshield, and then the water gets in and freezes and then basically splits the entire thing in half. And I think that's eventually what happens with this Penn State defense.
There is Micker Walker chiming in the comments. Still early for Kashawn, Travion Henderson's younger brother, who we were asked about earlier, but he's been making plays for Hopewell. He'll obviously be at Ohio State quite a bit, and if he's good enough to play at Ohio State, then you have to like the Buckeyes' chances. I think he's got to look at what the Buckeyes are doing with his older brother, and if that is an opportunity for him, you would have to think that's going to be a pretty appealing opportunity, because his older brother seems to be doing just fine so far at Ohio State. So, the defensive backfield for Penn State is maybe the strength of the team. It's certainly the strength of the defense, and the defense is better than the offense, so I'm going to say strength of the team. I mean, you've got Tariq Castro-Fields, you've got Brisker, the safety, you've got Joey Porter Jr., so you get 2 good corners, a pretty good safety. This feels like I'm going to be really intrigued, Kevin, to see what is this, how open are the Ohio State receivers, and what does CJ Stroud look like throwing to maybe some tighter windows? I mean, we saw him throw the one into the real tight window last week, but he's had a lot of guys with a step or two of separation over the last month or so. I'm going to be real intrigued. How much separation can the wide receivers get, number one? And then if those windows are a little tighter, what does CJ Stroud look like throwing into those?
Well, the thing I'll be interested is, Penn State has not generated a ton of pass rush, so I don't think we're going to see Ohio State having to run a lot of 12 personnel in this game. So I think that they can go out and be 5 wide when they want to be. They can be 4 wide with with a back. So you can only defend so much at so much of a time. They may do what they can to try and take Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave out. Does that leave Jackson Smith and Jigba open? Do they sit there and sell out on there? Does this become the big Jeremy Ruckert game? Do we see a huge game for Jeremy Ruckert? I mean, do we see Trevion Henderson coming out of the backfield and hitting him in the flat and letting him do some of those Trevion Henderson things? So I think that you're going to see things that are going to be underneath to open up over the top. I don't know if we're going to see something necessarily right off the bat of where Ohio State's going to be able to just start, raining thunder down on them. But with that being said, I think that you look at Porter Jr., you look at Castro Fields, you look at both safeties. The safeties have combined for 5 interceptions on the year. I think they're all very talented, but they've gone against much less arm talent than what Ohio State has. And that's not to sit there and say that C.J. Stroud is perfect. He's not 100%. He's not throwing for 600 yards a game. But, I'm expecting to see a pretty favorable matchup for Ohio State, but maybe not off the bat. And then in the game thread, when people start freaking out after 2 series, and even if Ohio State does put up 14 points, they don't put up 14 points the right way. We're going to hear about it.
What? When has that, Kevin? When has that ever happened before?
I don't know. I'm just trying to stay up with the comments here.
I like the idea of the Penn State defense. Like, you have to pick your poison, and there's like 5 poisons. It's like, well, how many do I have to pick? You got to pick them all, and then or you pick 3 and there's still 2 left over, and boom, we've just been poisoned. And there's just so many different things, and you take away one thing, there are 3 other things that they can do, and it can fluctuate from play to play, and that's what makes this. That's the idea of the balanced offense. Whatever the defense wants to do is totally fine. Ohio State's fine with that. They'll just stay patient and do the other thing.
Yeah, the pick your poison thing with Ohio State, it reminds me of, I think it was beginning of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it might have been Temple of Doom, where they're sitting at the table in the restaurant and they have, 2 cups or 2 of the shot glasses are poisoned, and they have to spin the table around, and then they lose track of which one is which. That feels like that might be Penn State's defense tonight, trying to stop all of the things. I mean, I saw someone talking about the fact that it's going to be 1 on the ground for Ohio State. It does feel like this one's going to be 1 on the ground for Ohio State, at least to start with. And then that gets the safeties to suck up, and then you have the opportunity to hit something over the top. Treasure the Torah, on the opening drive for Ohio State, can anyone guess if Ohio State's first play will be run or pass? If you get it right, I'll put $100 in the super chat post game. Tony?
Well, I think if one person guesses run, the other guesses.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I was going to say we could cover all the bases here.
I'll go run. Tom, you go pass. Kevin, you go punt.
Kevin's going to take intentional safety. So
that would be something. That would be something.
What has I think do they usually pass? It's like a little play action, and it's a little 10-yard pass or something like that. So I will say pass.
Kevin?
I think everybody's expecting them to come out and run. Ohio State is a Big Ten team. Ohio State's DNA is run. Trevion Henderson, run. They're going to pass.
I'm going to say, I'm actually going to say run, but I think maybe a little misdirection. Like maybe you have, you fake to Henderson and you get someone coming on the end around, or, the jet sweep, which is the little touch pass, which is a pass, but, not really. Yeah, I think you whatever it is, it's going to be something that is fairly simple. Like when was the Garrett Wilson end around last year? Was it the first play of the game, the second play of the game against Penn State? No, against Penn State. At Penn State, they just hit a little end around to Garrett Wilson, and he took it down into the
he had like a 60-yarder or something. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, first or second play of the game, it feels like last year. That was definitely their opening drive, and very early in their opening drive. So, I don't know. Maybe that's too predictable to hit him with that again, but it would make Penn State fans so mad. So I don't know. Maybe Ryan Day's a troll. Who knows?
Mitch Rossi jet sweep.
Oh man, none more B1G than that. We will. We are expecting the availability report to come out in just a few minutes, but I did want to touch on the tight ends. Kevin mentioned them briefly. We had a question about them earlier. Tony, in the year of the tight end, is this a matchup where, if you're concerned about the corners, if you're concerned about the safeties, you maybe don't want to take a shot downfield, if it does get rainy or windy, which I don't think it sounds like it's going to, is this a Jeremy Ruckert game? We had a pretty big game from Jeremy Ruckert last week. Is this a 5-catch, 50-yard kind of game for Jeremy Ruckert?
I'm wondering if they're starting to move in that direction. He's had 10 catches the last 3 games, 4 against Rutgers, 1 against Maryland. Really wasn't needed in that game, and then 5 last week. And it opens up the middle of the field. He's a red zone guy as well. He's an end zone guy. And if the defense is going to be dropping in zones or whatever, not allowing these meshes to Jackson Smith and Jigba or Garrett Wilson, just these wide inside routes that crossing routes, I think there's going to be room for Jeremy Rucker in this game. I would like to see them do some more downfield stuff with him rather than just this constant outlet or just moving the chains because he has that capability. Maybe G. Scott, if he's back, there's some opportunity there as well. So, yeah, I'm expecting the tight end just to continue to stay involved because the defense has to focus so much on 3 of the best, I don't know, 5 or 6 receivers in the Big Ten, and so that's a lot of attention. And then if Jeremy Rucker is the forgotten guy, that's not so bad for an Ohio State offense that, as I said earlier, and then we said yesterday, is just maybe the most patient offense, the most patient 50-point-a-game offense in the nation.
Well, with the availability report is now out, tight end G. Scott not going to play tonight. I think the big names on here today are Master Teague, not going to play. Harry Miller, not going to play. Harry Miller, obviously, kind of in a backup role this year. But Master Teague, he was kind of questionable. Ryan Day was sort of hopeful when we talked to him earlier in the week. Sounds like he's not going to be able to go. We know already that Marcus Crowley is out for the year. That's, so now you're down to basically Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and Evan Pryor. So, look at this. The 3 running back thing that they had, the 6 running back thing that they had over the summer that was like, how can they possibly get everyone all these carries? Well, one of them's a linebacker now and 2 of them are hurt. And ta-da, you've got a pair and a spare. So, Tony, does that change your game plan at all? If you're down to just 2 running backs, 2 running backs, and then, do they trust Evan Pryor, in like a game still on the line situation, or is this really kind of like 2 running backs and then you trust Evan Pryor a little later on with, I think there's some questions about is he big enough to pick up blitzes and that kind of stuff. But, does that change your game plan at all if it's Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and then maybe a 3rd running back, but not necessarily?
No, I don't think so because I think you've got 2 guys in Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams who are productive Big Ten backs, and you can rely on them. They are enough for what you need. They are both starting caliber running backs, and so there's not always room for a 3rd running back. And I think the more you can get Mayan Williams, even if he's the last guy, although at this point now you almost have to protect him a little bit. And in the 4th quarter, if the game is out of hand, then yeah, it's Evan Pryor. But while the game is still in hand, I think you go with those 2. I wouldn't mind seeing Evan Pryor used a little bit here and there, and maybe some passing routes. I mentioned last week the wheel route with Evan Pryor wouldn't be a bad idea, but also wouldn't be a bad idea with Travion Henderson. It's not like you need to sub somebody out to throw to Travion, to throw to the running backs. So no, I don't think it changes anything really, and I think Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson are suited more for this Penn State defense than Master Teague is, because I think they'll be able to get through that hole and then make somebody miss, and that's not really Master Teague's game. So Master Teague would take maybe like a 3-yard carry and turn it into a 5, where these guys could take a 3-yard carry and turn it into 12 or 40 or whatever.
All right, I'm going to run through this full availability report just so everyone has the names. A lot of these are guys who've been out for a number of previous games. Cameron Babb, we know, probably out for the season. Marcus Crowley, we were told long-term injury. Jansen Dunn, probably out for the season. Tyler Friday is a long-term, possibly season-ending injury. Darian Henry Young out. Ja'Kalen Johnson and Jalen Johnson have both been out for a little while. Jaden McKenzie out. Mitchell Melton has been out for basically the whole season. Harry Miller has been kind of on and off this availability report. Noah Potter had eye surgery a couple weeks ago. He put that on Instagram, but he was at practice this week. I saw him at practice, walking around, and so that's a good sign. He's back with the team, so that's a positive sign for Noah Potter. Josh Proctor, we know, out for the season. G. Scott and Master Teague, we mentioned earlier. The only other name on there is Enoch Vamahi, the backup tackle. So, offensive line depth is not really a big concern for Ohio State, but you don't want to lose a backup tackle if you don't have to. But that's not a real. There's, for a team that is coming off of a game on a wet turf. It's good to see Hopefully he's well enough to play this weekend. This does feel a little bit like a team that had a bye pretty recently and was able to get some guys healthy. So, Kevin, for this time of year, you don't ever want to see anyone this time of year. That's really not bad for a team that's played as many games as Ohio State has at this point.
No, I mean, it feels like a lot of injuries, and it is. I mean, it is a number of injuries when you're dealing with having 85, 82, 83, however many scholarships you have. But you're playing. How many players are you really playing in terms of meaningful minutes in games? I mean, you hate losing development with some of the younger guys. But no, I don't want to speak anything into existence, so I'm being very careful and dancing around this because I'm a big believer in superstition, juju, whatever you want to call it. They've done a good job, but they've dealt with some bumps and bruises along the way. They came out to start the season. No Cam Brown, no Seven Banks. I mean, this team has not been immune to dealing with injuries, but as we sit here and we're essentially in November, this is the last game of October, all things being equal, they're doing pretty well compared to, their Big Ten brethren.
All right, and we can, do we want to start doing some listener questions or viewer questions?
Yeah, I'm just getting everything else I see that I like into the queue, but let's start with what we have in the queue, and I'll try to add to it. We got one from Jordan Kapler. Who on offense and defense for Ohio State do you want to see have an awesome game? And you can't say Burke or Henderson. So Jordan putting constraints on us already. Damn it, Jordan.
All right. While Tony answers that, I'm going to pull up my bold predictions and remember who I want to have a good game. Tony, go ahead and give us your pick to click for today for Ohio State.
Well, rather than looking for, I'm interested to see what CJ Stroud looks like against this Penn State defense in that secondary. How accurate is he? And because he's going to need to be accurate, I believe, even though Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith, and Jigba will get separation on anybody. The more accurate he is, the less that separation needs to be there, and then you'll have more run after the catch. So I think if CJ Stroud has a really good game, then I'm not sure that they even need to be able to run the ball. So, I think that's one to watch. Defensively, how about can't have Denzel Burke. So, I Steel Chambers is always fun to watch. So let's see what he's doing. And does he start to, play more than Taraji Mitchell, or do they keep it 50-50 or as 50-50 as they have, or does Steel Chambers start to get some more playing time and start to overtake some things? And if they're not able to throw the ball downfield and you've got all of these different screens, I'm wondering if he's going to be the guy that's going to be blowing some stuff up, or is it going to be Ronnie Hickman, where you can afford to be aggressive as a defense and really trigger on these screens. So let's see what Steel Chambers does in regards to those.
Kevin, what about you?
I'm gonna say Jeremy Ruckert on offense, because I think that if the Penn State secondary is as advertised, and it's not a result of them playing Manny, Mo, and Jack from the Pep Boys in terms of the quarterbacks they faced this season, which I kind of think it is, I think that Jeremy Ruckert may be that big safety valve. I think that he might be the important guy offensively. On the defensive side, I know, was it on our Friday show? I think we did something similar, and it was kind of going through the defensive line, who might be the rush in that has the biggest game. And with Burke taken off the table and Steel Chambers now taken off the table, I would like to sit there and just say the rush ins, but if I have to say somebody, I don't know. I'm going to change it from last time. How about JT Tuimoloau? How about him coming in and having a huge game, having that big freshman impact? I certainly remember a game where Chase Young was still very early in his career and just ate up Penn State. Could we see something similar? I don't know, but it would be something.
I had a Michigan fan, real quick, Tom. I had a Michigan fan DMing me after watching, not at the end of the game, but throughout the game, later in the game, saying, is this what it's talking about? Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo is like, is this what it was like to have Chase Young and Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa? Because it's awesome. It's like, well, that's kind of what it was like, where you had, Chase Young could just destroy people, and the Bosa's would, and then so that's what it was like, Michigan fans. Except Ohio State only lost to Michigan State every 2 out of 5 years under Mark D'Antonio. Not to derail the show, sorry.
Yeah, and Tony delayed me just long enough that AW got in the comments and took my answer, which was Tyreek Smith. It would be, this is a game where, with Penn State's offensive line being kind of shaky, it feels like one of those veteran guys, one of those guys who is in, a potential contract year, whether it's Zach Harrison or Tyreek Smith. This is when you kind of like to see them make a difference, because I don't think Penn State's going to be able to run the ball against Ohio State, because Penn State hasn't been able to run the ball against anyone this year for the most part. And I saw Nick in the comments earlier saying it was laughable that we were talking about this, like Penn State had no chance to win the game. I mean, we're not saying Penn State has no chance to win the game. We're just saying that pretty much everything about the game suggests Penn State is probably not going to win this game, and it might not be super close, because I'm not sure if you want to rewind 7 days. They just lost at home to Illinois, who just to Rutgers. Like, this is not like Illinois has turned the corner. It's like, no, Penn State does not have a great offensive line. The running game has not been there. Sean Clifford is not 100%, no matter what James Franklin said this week. Yeah, they've got Jahan Dotson. You have to have a quarterback who is healthy enough and has enough time to get him the ball. And, to get him the ball downfield, you have to have plenty of time to throw. And, yes, Ohio State has not faced a wide receiver like Jahan Dotson. Guess what? Jahan Dotson probably hasn't gone up against corners as good as Denzel Burke. So, we're not being homers here. We have picked against Ohio State plenty in the past, but it's when it's teams that have not lost the previous week to Illinois. So that's and whose coach may not be 1 foot out the door. That is, it is possible that Penn State wins this game, but it probably involves a lot of turnovers. El Suzabo says Florida intercepted in the end zone. Yes, Florida had the ball driving against Georgia, and then heaved one in the end zone and got picked off. So 3-0 Georgia in Tony. It's a classic defensive battle in the SEC, as opposed to LOL #B1G when it looks like that somewhere in the upper Midwest.
You know how I know the SEC is great? Because the SEC keeps intercepting Florida's quarterbacks. I think that is either the 13th or 15th interception that Florida has thrown. And I'm guessing most of those have been to the SEC, because I wouldn't expect a Florida quarterback you can't expect a Florida quarterback to throw an interception to a quality non-conference opponent, since they never play any quality non-conference opponents.
Very nice. Dan Dawson, will James Franklin beat Illinois in the Big House tonight? If you didn't see James Franklin's press conference this week, it was a spectacle. It was not the greatest performance on camera I've ever seen. He did. He twice referenced the fact that he was, he wasn't worried about his job status. He wasn't worried about that being a distraction. He was just focused on this week's game against Illinois. Twice. And then he called Ohio State in the Big House, which is like, it's kind of big, but partial credit maybe. It is the biggest house in the Big Ten that's going to have a football game this weekend, so sure, maybe. But yeah, so that was James Franklin this week, and you do wonder, Kevin, if the distraction of, is James Franklin the next guy at USC, or is James Franklin the next guy at LSU? You do wonder if that's going to wear on that Penn State team a little bit this week, because this has been all over the place. Our Bill Green at Buckeye Scoop has had some fantastic reporting on James Franklin's job status and where things may stand with him. Everyone wants to say that, put on a brave face and say, no, we're not worried about that. We're just focused on the game. It's like, you can't help but be a little concerned when your coach is, not particularly good at hiding the fact that he maybe is kind of 1 foot out the door.
Yeah, I talked to a Penn State buddy of mine about it, and he said that James Franklin often misspeaks in those types of situations. But then I was like, but does he say it twice in a statement and get multiple factors wrong? He's like, well, probably not. So you do wonder kind of where his head is. The changing of agents, going to Jimmy Sexton, who's much more of an aggressive agent in terms of job changes and things along those lines, and just his name being super hot, and Georgia's just scored a touchdown. I don't know what happened, but they just scored. You wonder if that lack of focus for a team that's coming off of at least 6 bad quarters of football in a row. You need that coach to be dialed in, and you certainly, guys are going to work more with their assistant, their position coaches and the coordinators and maybe the head coach. But I think there could be some residual. It just, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of jokes that I want to make about this that probably are not super appropriate. But if you're not on board with the captain right now, I mean, I think that I don't think that they're going to be mentally sharp.
And that was go ahead, Tony.
I think the players reflect their coaches in all instances, whether it's intensity, whether it's Michigan State and Mel Tucker, whether it's the joyless Wolverines we've seen over the years because of their joyless coach, or it's Ohio State and Ryan Day. The players reflect what their coaches put out, and if the coach is distracted, I don't know how the players can remain as attentive as they need to. I guess it's up to the assistants, but as I said earlier in the week, how much are these assistants reaching out to other programs about where are we going to coach next year? Where are we going to live next year? And all of those things that go on when a head coach is looking for a job, because then the assistant coaches are going to be in limbo, and whether they stay at the current job, whether the coach takes them with them, or whether they finally go and, now is the time to make another step to another program. And that also depends on what kind of openings there are. So it can be a stressful time for assistants as well, because that's the assistant coach life when you're not making 800,000 or 400,000 and you're just kind of in maybe your earlier years and you've got a young family or anything like that. It all creates distractions.
AW says Mel Tucker to LSU and Franklin to USC. I mean, that's entirely possible. Frankly, Mel Tucker is they have first of all, they've had some success at the past at LSU hiring a former Michigan State head coach who had ties to Nick Saban, mostly by being Nick Saban. Mel Tucker, of course, a former Saban assistant, former SEC assistant. I mean, he is someone who you could absolutely see taking that job, especially, that was an impressive win today. That was, he has taken that program and given them a real identity, which is something LSU kind of feels like they're looking for now. I don't know what the heck USC is going to do with that job. That athletic department's kind of a mess right now. I don't know that Franklin feels like a great fit, but I don't know who feels like a great fit. I don't know who the great fit is out there. Treasure the Torah says, I did this early because I love the scoop. I'm a man of my word. Have some drinks on me, fellas. Thank you for your super chat, Treasure the Torah. We do appreciate it. Appreciate your support. Oregon right now up 28-7 on Colorado, so they might actually finally beat a team by more than a touchdown this year, who's an FBS team. Good for them. I guess let's talk a little bit about Oregon. Kevin, the Ducks, to me, it seems like there's so much, here's what they have going for them if this ends up being a head-to-head thing with Ohio State. They have a head-to-head win against Ohio State, and they will presumably have the higher-ranked win at the end of the season. Here's what Ohio State has going for them. Literally everything else. They have a better schedule. They are in a more competitive conference. They are going to have more, Oregon has the best win. Ohio State's probably going to have the second, third, fourth, and maybe fifth best wins between those two teams. Ohio State has had, you're going to hear the committee talk a lot about game control later on the season. Ohio State has maintained game control all year. Oregon has basically not. I don't know how many minutes has Oregon been up by more than 14 points on an FBS opponent this season. It feels like the answer is like 12 outside of, and now they're going to do it today. But, where do you think that's at? But I've heard national people, like not like clown national people, but like actual Latin national people say that, how do you overlook the head-to-head win? Like, what are you playing for if you're overlooking the head-to-head win? How do you think the committee sorts that out if Ohio State continues to play and win in dominating fashion, and Oregon continues to just kind of like fart along and just kind of scrape up?
It's easy. You just do it. I mean, Ohio State's having to wear this like a 900-pound anchor necklace around its neck, and that's difficult. And I'm not trying to explain away the fact that Ohio State lost to Oregon. Ohio State did lose to Oregon. Oregon was number 11 in the polls. Moved up to whatever it was, 2, 3, and then lost its Stanford game and has looked very unimpressive at this point. But, if you're really going to live by that, you may as well just stop playing the second you lose, because there's no way to come back at that point unless the other team loses more than you. So, I don't understand why Ohio State's being held to a standard that we've not held other teams to in the past. It just seems to be a little uneven at this point. It's not like the Oregon game was just this tremendous 20-point upset. Ohio State was it just doesn't have that feel to it. I still think that there are going to be some people that, I've heard both arguments. I've heard that either in the initial rankings that they may not take that into account, but it's something that could fly back in. If both teams are sitting with a conference championship at the end, that it becomes, a differentiation point. I've heard the other way of saying it will be something at first, but as Ohio State continues to play its November schedule, maybe we see some separation. But the charter of the College Football Playoff Committee is to put the 4 best, most deserving teams into the playoff. They don't have to live by anybody other's standards. They live by their own rules, their own standards. That is their only being. Their only being is to sit there and put the 4 best teams in. And if Ohio State is going out and murdering teams, I don't know how you keep Ohio State out. I mean, especially if Oregon is going through a very weak Pac-12 and winning games on a last possession or making a goal line stand or whatever. It's just apples and oranges to me.
Yeah, I think for me,
and while Kevin gets the next question,
yeah, I was just going to say
go ahead, Tony.
I think once you lose a game, you lose the power of that head-to-head. You lose the full power of that head-to-head, because now you have shown a weakness. Now you have shown a flaw, and so that flaw has to come into account. And I know people think that Oregon may need a second loss, but if you're not going to ignore Ohio State's loss, how can you ignore Oregon's loss? And if it had been to Akron, would it be? Do you still like? How bad does the loss have to be before you stop talking about the head-to-head? And I understand the weight of the head-to-head. I think head-to-head in November is much different than head-to-head in September. And again, once you have a loss, you lose a lot of your argument to me.
Yeah, Nick says Michigan State should jump Ohio State because they're undefeated and have a better win. I mean, if they do, can Ohio State fans really complain? I mean, that's going to get sorted out on the field later anyway. So, I mean, and we don't know what the committee is going to do tomorrow. That's the first College Football Playoff Committee ranking come out on Tuesday night. We are planning to do a live show that night. We'll see exactly how we're going to do it. We may just stream during the show. Apparently, my streaming of other stuff is slowing down my feed, so I've turned off the Oregon game. So I am now part of the problem with no one watching Pac-12 games. Sorry. I do have the Georgia-Florida game up, but Georgia is up by 10, so that game's probably pretty much over because there's no way Florida's scoring 10 points on the Georgia defense. So. Mecca says, "Hey, what's up, guys?" And Kevin, just feel free to keep cycling through those, and we'll try and get through as many.
I'm hitting some live ones. I'm going back into the queue. I'm doing the best that I can here.
Steve says Cincinnati should drop out, and they're not going to drop out of the top 4, I don't think, but it feels like if they keep playing the way they have been the last couple weeks. And, Indiana, which was, supposed to be before the season, one of their real signature wins, Indiana is going straight down the drain right now. They lost to Maryland earlier today and, have not been competitive against any other of the decent teams. And they were pretty decent. They were pretty competitive against Cincinnati. It feels like this is going to be another year where, even if Cincinnati does go undefeated, the committee is going to have plenty of ammunition to keep them out. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, and this is exactly what the committee was hoping for. Another game like here against Tulane, where you can now move Alabama ahead of them or whoever you want. And I wouldn't be shocked if Cincinnati is 3 or 4 in that initial poll, and then just continue to get gradually pushed out because there are no wins left to move them higher. And if they continue to look like this, that's not going to be great. But other teams behind them are going to have games that can push them up there. Ohio State beating Michigan State, an undefeated Michigan State, a top 5, top 6 Michigan State will help. And that's something that Cincinnati's not going to have. And so they needed to play a lot better this last month and they haven't done it. And while I wonder if they would have made it anyway, and Georgia just scored a possible touchdown, I, I do kind of blame Cincinnati for their own failings at this point because they have been just playing to the level of their competition, and you can only do that in the Power Five, and maybe not even in the ACC right now.
Yeah, maybe it's not a fair standard, but that's the standard, and they're not coming close to meeting it right now. You go back to like all these Boise State teams who, you would just they need to have the Boise State season where they have the early couple wins, and then you don't pay much attention to them, and then you just on the halftime show you see the one play where it's a 70-yard touchdown pass or it's a pick six or whatever, and they put up the score graphic and it's 50-10, and it's like, all right, well, they just check the box, that's fine, like move on to the next week. That's what Cincinnati needs to be doing, and instead they're the game that I'm like flipping off other games to flip over to, because it's like, whoa, 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 they're up, they're up by 2 in the middle of the third quarter, like whoa, 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 that, like, you don't want to be that. You want to be the team that just kind of gets forgotten, and it's just like, well, of course they're going to win by 1 million this week. They win by 1 million every week, and that's how they're a legitimate college football playoff contender. They're not doing that. They have not done that for a bunch of the season, so that's a big concern. Christopher says, we certainly learned that Michigan didn't have quite the defense that many thought they did. That was, the pass defense was okay, and how much do you want to put on, Peyton Thorne, but a lot of that is just Michigan's got a real good pass rush. David Ajabo and Aiden Hutchinson are fantastic. Michigan State's offensive line not particularly great, but if you get run on like they did, if you are going to be featured prominently in someone's Heisman campaign, like, that's not good. That is a problem for your defense. And, if you listen to Tony and I talking about Michigan on a lot of these previous Michigan Monday shows, it's like, yeah, I mean, they look good right now and the numbers are real pretty and they keep winning, but it's, you can see the cracks in the dam already forming, some of those bursts today. And, the run game that was so fantastic earlier in the year was just not. Now, the passing game was better, but the run game, they were supposed to be playing, relying on running the ball and playing defense. And Kevin, they really didn't get either of those today.
No, no. And I was talking to a buddy of mine who's not a Big Ten guy before, and I was like, well, here are all the reasons why this team's not going to win, and here are all the reasons why this team's not going to win, and all the reasons I listed for Michigan not getting the win came to pass, and it was a very different game between the two halves. I think that once Michigan State kind of remembered, hey, we got Kenneth Walker. He's pretty damn good. We should probably feed him. Things got a little bit better. I certainly didn't see this world beater in Peyton Thorne in terms of throwing the ball, but I kind of felt some of those numbers were a little ginned up by, some lesser opponents. But Kenneth Walker is the real deal, but even with what Michigan State's done, I think that I just think that their defense is problematic for them. And then on the other side of the ball, I think that the two best players for Michigan certainly the three best players, both of their ends had themselves a game. I thought, I really am a big Dax Hill fan. I think he's a really good player, but I still think you were able to find some soft spots over there. And why are they, and this is for Tony because of his Michigan Monday piece, why do they keep bringing McCarthy out there in high leverage situations?
Especially after he fumbled once, they weren't able to run the ball very well, and so this allows them to run the ball a little bit better with the read option, and it just gives them a little bit more juice on the ground. Hassan Haskins, 14 carries, 59 yards, a 4.2 average. Blake Corum held completely in check, 13 for 45, a 3.5 yard average. And McCarthy just gives them a little bit of athleticism that Cade McNamara doesn't. However, J.J. McCarthy almost gave that game away with a fumble in the fourth quarter. I believe it was in the fourth quarter. And then they went back to him again so that he could fully give the game away with a fumble. And, Tom and I have been talking about, do you just turn to J.J. McCarthy because he gives you the ability to throw the ball that you will need to beat Ohio State? He throws into the end zone. Cade McNamara does not throw it into the end zone. And you saw that with the touchdown pass to, I don't know if it was Anthony, who came out of almost nowhere today, Andrell Anthony, to just be a star. But man, not a great day for McCarthy in the role that they have for him, which I don't want to say it's misplaced because it's worked okay. But in those big situations, you know, Cade McNamara throwing for like what 350 yards, 380 yards in this game, and is having his best game as a Wolverine. And then to be like, you know what, we're going to stick to our guns. We're going to keep doing this with McCarthy. You know, I just it was a poor decision in my opinion, given the fact that no, the running game wasn't great, but it was doing okay. And you know, you get first, second, third down, get some yards, have a short third down play, and that's exactly what McNamara does. And he'll hit Eric All for 8 yards and move the chains again. But boy, I don't know if they're going to revisit the McCarthy thing because you know the cat is already out of the bag and he's already done what he did in this one. But I guess know the situation better, Tom.
Well, you have to recognize. Well, first of all, we're just going to shuffle the quarterbacks in and out like from a play to play, you know, on a play to play basis, not like you get a drive, like, okay, well, it's 2nd and 7, so now we're going to bring in JJ McCarthy. Like, when has that ever worked well? I mean, it's like Tim Tebow and Chris Leak, okay, that worked out reasonably well once. But I mean, like when it was like Stanley Jackson, Joe Germain, like they didn't really do that a ton. You think back to like some of those like Doug Johnson, whoever Doug Johnson's platoon partner was with Spurrier in Florida in the early 90s. Like a lot of times it just, when you try and do that, it always goes like the Dwayne Haskins, Tate Martell, like, oh, we've got the Tate Martell package. Like, well, okay. And then he comes in and everyone in the world knows you're going to run. And if you try and have him throw, the issue is you haven't had J.J. McCarthy throw the ball that much in previous games. The issue has been like you have brought him in to run the ball. That's fine. That's great. But you have to have him throw the ball too in you know, to get ready for when you're playing a big game. Like you have to let him throw the ball 15 times against whichever direction was it, Central Michigan, Western Michigan, whichever directional Michigan they played earlier in the year. And, you know, some of those games where you're up 60 points on Northern Illinois, like that's when you let him throw the ball 15, 20 times. You bring him in early and you let him do it. They just kind of like thrust him in there in these big moments today. It's like, oh, well, now go make some plays. Like, well, either he's going to run the ball, which he is very, you know, that's very predictable that that's what we're doing when he's in there, or B, he's going to have to throw the ball against a better defense on the road in a tight situation when he hasn't had that many reps. You go through and look at Kyle McCord's reps. Kyle McCord's pass attempts at Ohio State, much higher than J.J. McCarthy's. Even Jack Miller coming into this week, I think Jack Miller, Ohio State's third quarterback, was close to J.J. McCarthy's number of pass attempts. That's the issue we've had. It's like, yes, he is the guy who gives him the best chance to beat Ohio State if everything's clicking. But you haven't given him the opportunity to actually have things clicking. So that's the problem. So, yeah, Jordan says when a Big Ten game ends the first quarter 0-0, pathetic Big Ten teams. When an SEC game does the same, it just means more. 17-0 Georgia right now. I think this one is done meaning anything. So we have I just saw another one a minute ago up there. Either direction is fine.
I'm looking. I mean, we got more people that want to talk about the Michigan game or the Georgia game, and that's a lot of the stuff in the queue right now. Is there huge debate right now between Nick M and everybody else on the chat? Nick M isn't sold on Ohio State. Everybody else is not sold on Nick M at this point.
Well, and that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we'll find out more about Ohio State tonight, and you know, if this is a very close game, we'll come back and we'll tell you we were wrong. But I just, you know, looking at Penn State, like this is looking at the Ohio State Penn State game and saying Ohio State's going to potentially win by 3 touchdowns is more of a reflection on Penn State, I think, than anything else. Because I think this is going to be a bigger challenge for Ohio State. But this is a little like the Indiana game last week, Tony, where it's like, okay, so let's say that the other team's going to pull the upset. Mm-hmm. Where are the points coming from? Show me where the points are coming from. And it can't just be a game of you're just throwing, you know, like the game 500 where we're just going to throw the ball up in the air and Jahan Dotson's going to work his magic and he's going to score 4 touchdowns and then it's 28 points and ta-da, that's it. Like, show me where the points are coming from.
Yeah, I completely agree. And they can't run on anybody. They have trouble throwing the ball. You don't know how healthy Sean Clifford is going to be. It's like 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. There's no algebra here. It's just easy arithmetic. A child can do it. And if it would be such a surprise and such a shock and so out of character for this Penn State offense to just score 31 points in this game. Like if they did score 31, that might require 2 defensive touchdowns or some turnovers deep in Ohio State territory to where you get a couple of 12-yard touchdown drives. And that's what this Penn State offense is going to need. And if Ohio State doesn't turn the ball over, I mean, they can win with 17 points, I think. And so this is the confidence in Ohio State, Tom, as you said, it's completely, as Georgia's about to score another touchdown, perhaps another defensive touchdown, it's completely related to Penn State's lack of offense, inability to run. We have certainly the Illinois outcome. I mean, can't forget that. I mean, nobody will ever forget that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to take that into account as well. And so, yeah, it's just who here is what rational person is going to say 34-31, something like that. And how, in what way? And I also saw Nick talking about Aiden Hutchinson. And I'm really looking forward to seeing Aiden Hutchinson and even David Ojabo against DeJuan Jones and Nick Petit-Frere. That might be Aiden Hutchinson and Ohio State's offensive tackles might be the matchup of the year in the Big Ten, and it might not be close. And that I'm not saying that will determine the game because we know running the ball will determine the game, and some big plays from the Ohio State offense and limiting some big plays, and maybe Andrell Anthony at Michigan will help them, and they need that. But if you slow down Aiden Hutchinson and you slow down David Ojabo, now you've allowed some downfield passing. And at that point, I'm going to say the same thing about Michigan. It's a 3 touchdown game, just like Penn State, but for different reasons.
Yeah, and interesting. There was a good one up there from APEP a second ago about Michigan and how the Ohio State needs Michigan and Michigan State to be ranked pretty highly at the end of the year in terms of building resume, which is true. That's all true. But the question was, how far does Michigan drop? And Kevin, on the road in a game where they led by 16 points against another team that has been judged as a top 10 team, to lose in, last possession, very competitive game, Michigan has to stay a top 10 team after that game, right?
I think so.
Good, thank you. From Rick.
Well, I didn't know that I needed to give sure. I was too busy thinking about Rick Reese's comment right there on the super chat.
Yeah, I see tonight's OSU offense relying on tight ends and running Henderson 20+ times, says Rick. I mean, your thoughts, Kevin? I mean, I think that's a possibility.
That's kind of, when we answered the question earlier about who, taking Trevion and Denzel Burke off either side of the ball, who needs to have a big game or who do you want to see have a big game? And I said Jeremy Ruckert. And, last time I checked, he was a tight end. And, with no G. Scott, I mean, it's going to be Ruckert and Stover. And, those are going to be your main guys. And as I said, I don't think that I'm going to expect to see them run a lot of 12 personnel with 2 tights out there. But I think that we could really see Ruckert have a big game as a pass catcher. And, running Henderson 20 times, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we certainly have not seen a lot of opportunity for him to get much past 10 or 11. So, if Ohio State's able to do that, I mean, it means they're going to be able to kind of run their own tempo, run their own pace. And, if they're going to the tight end, they're not going to be hitting a lot of home runs, at least at that point. But I think that both the Henderson run and the tight ends, I think that allows them to go up top and still be able to get 40+ points.
And there was a question earlier about Oklahoma, and is Oklahoma going to turn into a pumpkin basically at some point? Because they've been playing a bunch of close games, not so close today against Texas Tech, but they've had a bunch of close games recently, including Kansas last week, Texas a couple weeks ago, Kansas State the week before that, West Virginia the week before that, Nebraska the week before that, Tulane week 1. I mean, they have been seemingly living on borrowed time for quite a while. They're off next week, but here's how they finish the season. At Baylor, Baylor just had a big comeback win against Texas today. Home for Iowa State, who is nasty, and then at Oklahoma State. Like it feels to me like, Kevin, that they are due for, at some point your luck's going to run out.
they're going to go out and have one of those middling games against a team that's going to punish them for it. They've had some of these middling games against Kansas, and Kansas can't punish you for it. You just can't do that. I mean, they had a middling game, and granted, it was a different quarterback against Nebraska, and Nebraska couldn't punish them for it. Baylor can. Oklahoma State can. I mean, there are teams on that schedule that are going to be able to put enough points up. I mean, so I certainly think that a loss is still hanging around out there. And, I quietly didn't really pay a lot of attention to Baylor. They're sitting 7-1. I think there's a tremendous talent gap there. But with that being said, Dave Aranda has a team that's bought in. And I think it's a team that certainly is capable of weathering whatever storm that Oklahoma is able to throw at it and come out the other end with a dub.
And if we mentioned Nebraska there, and that's, of course, who Ohio State plays next week. Nebraska up 17-14 on Purdue at halftime. It's that is an interesting team to me, Tony, Nebraska, because they're 3-5 right now. They desperately need to get to a bowl game this year for Scott Frost's job status. You only get one more loss this year. And you got Ohio State coming to town next week. You're going to be a big underdog. You kind of figure that's if you're going to use it, that's where you have to use it. But here's who they still have. They've got Purdue today. That one's not done yet. It's only a 3-point lead at halftime. Then Ohio State next week at Wisconsin. And then they finish with Iowa. Now, Iowa looks a lot more beatable than they did a week or two ago. Wisconsin probably looks a lot less beatable than they did a week or two ago. Ohio State is Ohio State. I mean, handicap the likelihood that Nebraska somehow goes 3-1 in that home stretch of the season.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd give that very good odds for the Ohio State and the Wisconsin game, as you said. Like Iowa, not that the Emperor ever had clothes there, but I think everybody realizes what they are now. Wisconsin people are maybe waking up to see a little bit more of, okay, this is kind of what we expected, even though I don't know that the passing game is really there for Wisconsin. And I don't know how good they actually are, but they're beating teams now. So that's an improvement. I don't know that Nebraska is to the point where, they can go on the road and beat Wisconsin. I almost feel like they'd have a better chance of beating Ohio State just for like Ohio State overlooking them and being in Nebraska. Not that I think that that's likely. So 2-2 kind of feels like that's almost the best they can hope for at this point. And maybe if the APR is high enough, they can go bowling.
Yeah, and if they go 5-7, but they end with a win over a ranked Iowa team, like, is that enough to maybe buy them another year? Maybe depends on what Matt Campbell is thinking. Had a question earlier about Ohio not celebrating, not doing trick or treating on Halloween. That was bizarre to me. We always trick or treated growing up on the East Coast. We always trick or treated on October 31st. And then here they just don't do that. We did it on Thursday this week. There was a question from Yakov earlier about my kids' candy haul, which was generous. It was they ransacked the neighborhood pretty thoroughly, I would say. So it was an impressive haul. Did you guys trick or treat on Halloween, or did you have like a designated beggars night where you guys were? Because I know you guys grew up in very different places. So Tony, for you in lovely Henry County, Ohio, what was trick or treating like?
Usually we would go to, because I grew up in the country, so we would either have to go to the town where I lived near, which was Malinta, which had about 300 or 400 people and wasn't nearly enough.
Big city, yes, the big city.
So we would go instead to where my grandma lived, which was Holgate, which was, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people, there's much more, better options, better chances of a big haul. I assume it was Halloween because I don't really, and I don't know that it was or wasn't in terms of the exact date. I just assume it was because then you get here and it's, it's all different days, different times. It has to be before dark and, all of these different rules that doesn't necessarily apply back in the country and in the small town America, small town Ohio. So yeah, good times. Many years I would go as a hobo because it was easy and I had to close for it. And so, just
didn't have to change from school.
Yeah.
Exactly. Here's a horror story from my childhood. If we have time.
We certainly do. We always do.
Well, we're at a minute or an hour 15. I don't know. Be quick with it.
So it's the third grade, and there was you have like these costume competitions or whatever, and of course I was doing my standard hobo, but I didn't. My sister would sometimes give me like a black eye with makeup and stuff, but there was no
Or a
time for that in the
fist.
morning, so I trusted my third grade teacher to do my hobo makeup for me, and I don't know if she hated me. She certainly
Probably.
didn't respect me,
Definitely.
but I looked more like Gene Simmons than a hobo after she got done with me, and I had to wear that all day in school. And
Rocky Horror Gerdeman Show.
very much so. I'm still scarred from that and many other things from the third grade. But yeah, never. If you're like kind of a pain in class, never trust a teacher to do your Halloween makeup for you.
Could be worse. Could have been Peter Chris. Kevin, what about you in the Fox series, The OC? How about you? You
Yeah,
guys
growing
trick
up in
on Halloween?
civilization, we went on Halloween. It was from dusk until all the porch lights were out. Sometimes we would even have a second costume to go hit the houses that gave like the best candy. And we didn't have to exactly, Mr. Snrub. We didn't have to go. We didn't have to go to any other communities. I lived in a pre-planned housing tract, so we had plenty of houses to go to. And I think I probably trick or treated up until about the age 15. But granted, at 15, I still looked like I was about 11, so I was able to get away with it.
I do love the idea of Kevin growing up in the Sudden Valley housing development from Arrested Development. Um, Super chat from Treebuck. Tony had to dodge the combines, which is probably extremely factually accurate. Was it still harvest season? Seems like it would have been harvest season.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, ish. I mean, it just depends on the crop, beans or tomatoes or whatever. And yeah, you got to watch out for that stuff. And people park their tractors in driveways, and you got to walk around that stuff. You could get caught up in that stuff. It's no joke, Tom.
I know. Oh, I know. Jeffrey says, "Hey Tom, don't forget the Mets stink." Yeah, I know. I've been there for like 40 years. Yeah, well aware. Going back
Can I ask
to
you guys? Can I ask you guys a
sure.
question?
And Kevin, I want to go back to two comments because there was a good one about teams how they have to attack Ohio State. But go ahead, Tony.
Uh, Oregon and
Mm-hmm.
Michigan in the rankings. How far Michigan will drop? Michigan is ahead of Oregon right now by like one or two spots because they are ahead of Michigan State or behind Michigan State, depending on the poll. Justify dropping Michigan below Oregon based on their losses. I don't think you can. And yet, do either of you think Michigan is going to be ranked ahead of Oregon come Monday?
I think there's a possibility. I mean, Michigan doesn't have any real incredible wins, although the one at Wisconsin now looks better. That looks better than it did 24 hours ago. But I mean, I guess it just matters. Oregon has a better win than Michigan does, but Oregon's loss was substantially worse than Michigan's was. I mean, Oregon lost to a Stanford team that is like not good at all this year, like not good at all. So I guess it just sort of depends on what the AP poll voters want to prioritize. And, something that's worth keeping in mind is the AP poll voters are not the College Football Playoff Committee voters. Like, it'll be interesting to see what happens to the AP poll, but also what does the College Football Playoff Committee do? Because that I think is going to tell you a lot about where the how they really view the Oregon resume. If Oregon is still behind some of the other one-loss teams, and it's not, well, they're a one-loss team, but they have the best win, so they should be the top one-loss team. I think that's going to be real telling to me. If they're not only behind Ohio State, but also behind, some of the, Michigan and some of those other teams. Scott wants to know, how is Alabama ahead above the Buckeyes when they lost to an unranked team? I mean, I think they have better wins than Ohio State does right now. Do they have? Because Alabama beat who? Who does Alabama beat this year?
Ole
Florida,
Miss.
Yeah, Florida. I mean,
Ole Miss.
Ohio State. Ohio State. Yeah, Ole Miss is probably the best answer there. And Ohio State has absolutely steamrolled people, but they have not played. The win their wins this year have not been great. I mean, the best win probably in terms of like team right now is Minnesota, who's 6-2 or 5-2, something like that, and they play Northwestern later today or play them right now. But that's not. I mean, Minnesota's not ranked right now, and boy, would Minnesota's resume look a lot different if they hadn't somehow gacked that game up against Bowling Green. That was a bad one. There was one a couple spots back, and I don't know if Kevin can pull it up again. But
I was looking for it, and I couldn't find it yet.
It was the question essentially was the recipe for Big Ten teams was to beat Ohio State this year was you have to hope you can hold Ohio State's offense under 40, and then you have to figure out how to score 35 to 40 points to beat them. And that seems like that's the challenge to me because, you're going to have teams that can maybe hold you under 40, but there it is. Austin Carney, a perfect scenario for Penn State and the remaining Big Ten for that matter is keeping Ohio State under 40. The question is, can they score over 40 against a decent/good defense? And, I'll put this one to Tony. How many teams on Ohio State's schedule remaining can, have the ability on a good day to do both of those things? Because I think Penn State could hold them under 40 with a good day on defense, but I don't think there's a chance they can score 40. Michigan State, maybe. Michigan, maybe. I mean, how many teams left on the schedule? Maybe, Wisconsin potentially in the Big Ten championship game can at least do one of those things. I mean, how many teams in this schedule who are left can do those things?
Well, we saw Michigan need as many points as possible and come up with 33 today against Michigan State. And we saw Michigan State score 37 or whatever against Michigan. And I'm thinking Ohio State could score 40 against Michigan, thinking Ohio State could score 40 against Michigan State. And since neither of those two teams scored 40 against either of each other, like I don't know that I don't see either of those teams scoring 40 against Ohio State. And I was really impressed with what Michigan was able to do throwing the ball. And obviously Kenneth Walker is an issue, and he could create some problems for Ohio State. Wisconsin, they can't score it. And, I don't know that Ohio State's scoring 40 against them, but it might be 37 with a bunch of field goals and, moving the ball some and having some short fields. But, Penn State certainly known. I don't think anybody can do that until they get to the playoffs. And even then, you're asking Georgia to score 40 and not, again, what does Ohio State score against Georgia? 34, 35, 41. I don't know if I'm not comfortable saying into the 40s, but in the Big Ten, there's nobody that is, it would take turnovers, certainly. And then also cashing those turnovers in for points to be able to win some sort of a mini shootout against the Buckeyes in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I have a trouble seeing anyone outside of Georgia holding them under 30 this year. I mean, I know Oregon did, but this is a very different team at this point than it was at that point. So I have trouble seeing anyone on this remaining schedule or anyone they're likely to play in the playoff holding them under 30. So then, yeah, you've got to score into the upper 30s, and Alabama can do that. Georgia might be able to do that, especially if they get a couple short fields or whatever. Oklahoma, I don't know that Oklahoma's going to hold them under 40. So, Oklahoma's going to have to try and win a shootout, which has typically gone great for them in the college football playoff. Don't look that up. I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's true.
And Alex Grinch-led defense is going to – no, they're not going to do squat. I mean, it's – no.
Never say never.
Never.
Okay, I agree.
Tony, how many times has Oklahoma won a college football playoff game?
Somewhere between, I don't know, 0 and 5.
Zip and zilch.
Yeah. I mean, they almost won one once.
That counts.
A whole bunch of the other ones have looked not particularly competitive in kind of exactly the same way. Yeah. Any other good ones that we need to hit before we start wrapping up?
I think we start our downward descent here in terms of the pilot has put the fasten seatbelt sign on. Your bags may shift, so be careful when you open the overhead bins, and no more ketchup. So some would say we began our downward descent right when we started the show, but I, not being a hater, would never say that. Let's wrap up with some predictions for tonight, Kevin. What's your score prediction for tonight, and sort of give us a couple paragraphs on your thinking behind that? Well, with much deference to Nick M., who thinks that I'm crazy for thinking that this game is going to be very lopsided. It's going to be very lopsided. I'm not convinced that Sean Clifford is going to be able to be effective. I just think that he has been a little too dinged up. The Penn State offensive line has given up somewhere like 13 sacks so far this year. I think Ohio State's going to get home there. The inability to run the ball is going to end up costing Penn State as well. Noah Cain has 250-some yards rushing this season. Let's not forget, Trevion Henderson ran for 277 in one game against Tulsa. On the other side of the ball, I don't think Ohio State needs to get it all at once, but I think Ohio State can go station to station and have some extended, prolonged drives. And when it's all said and done, I think that Ohio State's going to be able to rest the starters for the fourth quarter. I like Ohio State to win this one going away 45-10.
I'm just noticing that Northwestern has their home sideline in the shade at Ryan Field, which, I mean, like, if you've ever seen a game at Ryan Field, like, it's 1,000,000 degrees and it's super hot and you definitely don't want to be in the sun is not typically the problem there, which is, I mean, man, that is a choice. All right. Tony, what are your thoughts on this game tonight?
Yeah, I think similarly to Kevin, which terrifies me in every way. But again, it's just where is Penn State going to be able to score, and how many points are they going to be able to score? And the running game isn't there. The Ohio State defense is good against bad offenses, and this is a bad Penn State offense. So I'm expecting a good Ohio State defense, and this will be the best defense Ohio State has faced. But I still think they're going to be able to do well enough. I have them winning 41-7, thinking there's going to be a couple of field goals in there, get bogged down in the red zone a little bit. I'll give Penn State's defense credit, but I think Ohio State will move the ball enough and score enough to be very comfortable. And maybe this is a 34-7 in the fourth quarter, or even a 27-7 in the fourth quarter, and the starters remain in there the entire time. So yes, I am going 41-7. And just real quickly, I'd say, Jordan Kapler, hope all is going well. We're thinking about you, and thanks for joining the show.
Yep, definitely thinking about you, bud, and hope everything is going okay. Apep Jones says 51-20. Chris Ashley says 48-13. No one's saying which team. Oh, there we go. David says 40-14 Buckeyes. 44-14 Buckeyes for P-Flaw. 42-17 where goes one. 58-10 Scott Varner. That's a little aggressive. 63-14.
There you
Dawson.
go.
We've seen that score happen either way in this series before.
Both directions. That is the biggest margin of victory in that exact score in both directions, 1994 and 2013. Yeah, I'm not going quite that high. I think 38-13. It's, a lot of the stuff you guys have said. I don't think Penn State's going to be able to move the ball very much. But they have a good enough defense that Ohio State probably bogs down in the red zone a couple times. Ohio State may go, between the 20s quite a bit and not always be able to punch it in. Thomas is 60-17. Goodness, you guys are setting yourselves up for quite an evening if these come true.
Bloodthirsty.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to get that high. 38-13 would be a very impressive when you cover the spread by almost a touchdown. This is a ranked team. You're just kind of continuing the. We talked about Cincinnati. You don't want this game to be competitive into the fourth quarter. You don't want this to be, 2 minutes left in the third quarter. Everyone's going, Ohio State an upset alert. I don't think you're going to see that tonight. They should be kind of comfortably ahead. I don't think this is going to be an absolute bloodbath or anything, but I think comfortably ahead for a decent chunk of the evening is probably realistic. And Dave Apep says 10 garbage points for Penn State in that 51-20 game. Like, woo, and you may have some garbage time points, but I don't know if it's quite that lopsided. But only one way to find out, and that is to watch the Ohio State football game tonight. I have good news. I have a feeling a lot of the people watching the stream are probably planning on doing exactly that. We are actually, our buddy Jordan says, thanks so much, guys. This things are going well. Wife and baby doing much better. Jordan, that is awesome to hear. We will continue to keep you in our thoughts and prayers. We are very, very happy to hear that. So that's awesome, bud. So we will be back after the game. We'll have our usual post-game show. I'm sure there's going to be a lot to talk about. Lots of Ohio State stuff. There's other games going on tonight as well. I mean, this is we could go a little long tonight. That we have some time tonight. We can get a little long. Let this baby breathe a little bit. So. Looking forward to doing that. We will see you guys back here later on this evening. Enjoy the Scarlet out. Enjoy what should be a fantastic atmosphere inside of Ohio Stadium. Should be a really, really fun night in the Horseshoe. And we will see you guys after the game. So make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel, youtube.com/BuckeyeScoop. Hit that bell That'll be the way you get notified as soon as we go live after the game. And then we will be doing lots of live Q&A, just like we have on this show, sharing our thoughts and analysis and all that and so much more. So youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Just hit that bell, subscribe to the channel, and then you get notified as soon as we go live after the game. Thank you guys all for joining us. This is always a lot of fun, and we'll see you after the game.